Nolan Crawford is an aviation safety inspector. He's assigned to the Flight Technologies and Procedures Division and Flight Operations Group as well. He's a retired Army Master Aviator. Nolan has got 30 years of aviation experience, military, civilian, spans air traffic control, helicopters, and airplanes. As an aviation safety inspector, he's assigned to Flight Standards and Procedures Division right now in Flight Operations Group. He's responsible for developing and revising and interpreting helicopter technical, regulatory, and guidance documents that are associated with operating within the National Airspace System. He's currently working on offshore operations, point and space approaches and departures, and heads one display. Next to him will be Wayne Frye, and Warren has been with the FAA for 22 years. He has served in a variety of positions and is currently the division manager at the FAA, responsible for 9 flight standards district offices. And prior to joining the FAA, Wayne was the manager for a large helicopter operator where he worked domestically and in a variety of countries, including Egypt, China, India, Panama, New Guinea, and throughout South America. He is also the government co-chair of the United States Helicopter Safety Team, where he supports ongoing efforts of industry and government professionals and enhance safety throughout the helicopter industry. Our next panelist, next to Wayne, will be Lirio. She is the executive director for the FAA of their Office of Rulemaking in the safety organization. The office is responsible for the overall rulemaking programs for the FAA, which includes rulemaking prioritization, work plan development, and oversight. The office also coordinates the public petition process for exemptions to existing rules and provides management with oversight for all the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, included the Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Lirio began with career with the FAA in the Los Angeles Aircraft Certification Office as a structures engineer working on type certification and supplemental type certificate programs for large transport airplanes, small airplanes, and rotorcraft. Our final panelist is Tom Luipersbeck. He has served as a POI for the FAA, both fixed-wing and helicopter operations, which included oversight of both small and large helicopter air ambulance operations. For now, he serves in AFS 250, the Part 135 Commuter and On-Demand Operations Policy Branch at the FAA headquarters. So if we mic'd up, we're good to go. Come on up and join me. Scurry.
I'm going to fix the PowerPoint on your computer real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's it.
There you go. Welcome all.
How you doing, Matt?
How are you? Absolutely.
Hey, Matt, good to see you again.
Glad you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Feels like we're back again.
How
We're
are
in Atlanta.
you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, so nice.
Close the door in case I need to stay.
So the general format and intent is to get update briefings for each one of these subject matter experts within the scope of their duties and responsibilities with the FAA as it relates to helicopter air ambulance operations and other rotorcraft activities. Hopefully the best part of this is going to be your questions. And I'm sure you got a bunch of them. I hope so, because they're ready to answer. And so let's start here with Nolan and just jump right into it.
All right, good morning. Again, as they said, I'm Nolan Crawford with the Flight Technology and Procedures Division. I'm going to cover a couple of different topics that we either have ongoing right now with a rule change coming up, or with a rule that's going to take effect, or a policy change, or The last thing I want to talk about is I'm actually going to ask for some help from folks here in the room.
I'm wondering if it might be helpful if I start off with just.
Can I change up the words already?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Lirio is going to go first.
Oh, okay.
So I was
Yeah.
thinking that, good
We're
morning.
flexible.
We are flexible. I just was thinking, the gentleman beside me are gonna.
Is
tell
the
me-
mic turned on?
Oh, I have to turn myself on.
Yeah. We got to do our pre-flight checks. There we go.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right, wonderful. Well, good morning. Not that the woman's the control freak up in the audience, but that might be the case. But no, we actually did a panel similar to this at the other conference, and I think what worked well was we baselined just the general rulemaking program, so there's a understanding of the magnitude of what we have, and then we can understand how the timing of the other activities relates to the overall program that the FAA is working on. So we had a chance to talk earlier, but then I probably didn't clarify that, but I think that might be helpful. I don't have any slides, but I'm just going to talk to some of the general statistics of where we are. Just rulemaking by the numbers for the FAA. So as the executive director for the Office of Rulemaking, we sit in aviation safety, but we manage the program for the whole FAA. Predominantly, the program is on the safety rules that fall within flight standards and aircraft certification, air traffic oversight, and such. But we are seeing more and more that the rules are integrated across the FAA in the air traffic arena, in the airports arena, as you can see with the new entrants in commercial space and with the drones, which may be a topic we might touch on as we go through the discussion. But just by the numbers, the Office of Rulemaking is composed of, we should be at 40, but we're actually having 33 analysts right now that work the 56 programs that we have that'll show up on the agenda shortly, the spring agenda that'll pop out. Of that, there's about 42 of them are MPRMs. Most of them are MPRMs. And then we have 10 final rules that are in the process. And then we have some other activities like some supplemental MPRMs and some advance notice of proposed MPRMs. Matt also mentioned we manage not only the rulemaking program, but we also do the committee activities, which is the pre-rulemaking activity that feeds into the program. Just like we will talk about the congressional activities, which is items that will feed into the rulemaking program. We have 8 active advisory committees. One of them is a Federal Advisory Committee Act committee. So it requires all of the transparency activity, and that's the ARAC, Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee, of which the helicopter taskings have been pretty relevant in the last few years. We also have 7 aviation rulemaking committees, which are under the authority of the administrator to do differently than other agencies. We don't have to go through the Federal Advisory Committee Act requirements, but we do actually treat them very similarly. In addition to just rulemaking activity plus the committee activity, one of the other things our office is responsible for is the petitions for rulemaking and exemptions that come in, the petitions for exemption, of which will also feed the rulemaking program. If we get to a threshold where we see a certain number of exemptions that are occurring, we'll often then look at that and determine if a rule is appropriate to make the change at that time. But for the 33 analysts we have, and using the staff that's across the Flight Standards Organization or the Aircraft Certification Organization, we're typically doing about 650 petitions for exemption on an annual basis. We do try to keep that metric of meeting 120 days, and we do that pretty well. We usually process 75% of that in that time, and then our average processing time is about 64 days. I had talked to a slide before of our general rulemaking process. I won't go into it here. But what I think is really important for the audience and the discussion that will follow is that communication is really important, engaging the stakeholders and trying to gather information to support a rule in advance of it in the pre-rulemaking stage is what's critical and for the success of the rule. And I say that because the environment we're working in right now for rulemaking is, I kind of want to always say it's like quicksand, it's ever changing. Don't move too fast because you might sink. So we have a number of activities that relate to rulemaking have attention that you may have heard about, and we're implementing the executive orders of this administration. It's known as the 2-for-1. I think everyone is familiar with that. If you're not, well, you're going to hear it now. But it's Executive Order 13771. Essentially, for every rule that we issue, we have to take away 2. So we have regulatory items and deregulatory items, and you'll see our program of 56, we have it balanced out within the fiscal year to assure that for every fiscal year, if we issue a regulatory item, which means it's a regulatory requirement that has a cost on industry, that we've actually completely offset that cost, and we've also withdrawn 2 items. And in fact, it's not just offset the cost of any regulatory item. We have to show a positive cost savings. As an example, in 2018, we actually issued 5 deregulatory items and nothing that was deregulatory, and we had a $64 million savings towards industry. And some of that, in fact, one rule that we did, which was the rotorcraft pilot compartment view, was a big contributor to that savings to industry. In 2019, we expect this year to issue 6 deregulatory items with a $6 million savings at this point. And there are some rotorcraft and I think HEMS activities that are included in that will be helpful, I think, for all of us. This will probably lead into the discussion, and then I'll be done, is essentially we have from the FAA reauthorization of 2018, there were 33 regulatory requirements that were identified. We can say that 2 of those actions are complete because they're already in current rulemaking, and one of them was to withdraw a rule that we never really did. And 6 requirements are in current regulatory programs, so they're ongoing, and 25 will actually be rolling in over the next few years. We are doing our best to try to meet and balance the requirements of the statute for the timing and the requirements with what we also have currently on our program, which is strongly safety-based. What also came out of reauthorization were 12 committee requirements, of which there are some that are related to the industry here that will be coming into ARAC in the near future. So essentially, that's the baseline for our program. That's where we are. That's what feeds into it. I would like to just emphasize, because I know maybe a question will come out, well, maybe I leave it to the question, is with the executive orders and implementation of it, has it affected our program in the areas of safety? And I would say no. I think it puts us into a perspective of looking at a different view of doing the rules and the timing. But one of the exceptions in the executive order is if a rule, and it's getting down to the details that may not be of all interest, but if a rule is designated non-significant by the Office of Management and Budget, and they can do that. If it's non-significant, it's below a certain cost threshold, or it's of something that they feel is important on a regular basis, they'll designate it non-significant, which means it doesn't have to be reviewed by them. If they give us that designation, which is about, I'd probably say 60% of our regulatory, maybe higher than that, are considered non-significant, then it does not have to be offset by the 2-for-1. So we can have some rules that are safety-focused, that will have some cost, but because they're non-significant, they're not having to be offset. So I think that's one point to keep in mind, that exemption process. And in our program, we actually have 11 of the rules that are exempted as in that category, that they do not have to be offset. So safety isn't really being impacted. I think what it does with the executive orders is provide us the opportunity to look at things in a bigger picture and the impact on industry, which I think is required, right? So I'll turn it over now for the specifics.
Okay, who's next?
Right.
Okay, 2 of the rules that Lirio is referring to that go in effect January 1st, 2020 is 91-225 and 91-227, which deals with your automatic dependent surveillance broadcast out, or ADSB, for those folks that will be working in the ruled airspace that is covered by the rule. For those that don't know what ADSB is, basically it is a new surveillance technology deals with a aircraft position source, aircraft avionics, and a ground infrastructure system that's going to allow us to transition the national airspace system from the radar world that we currently live in to a new satellite-based technology for aircraft position location to assist in the efficiency and movement of air traffic for the air traffic control services. In saying that, with the 2 rules out there, not everyone is going to have to equip. If you're not planning to work on a normal basis in the ruled airspace as it is covered, the rule doesn't necessarily affect you. But if you are working in that ruled airspace, you got to remember that 1 January 2020 is the date for that rule to go into effect. One of the things that just hit the National Registry here recently is a policy on that's dealing with non-equipped aircraft, which will go into effect January the 2nd, 2020. So that's not necessarily a get-out-of-jail-free card. That's not what that's meant. That's not a way to not equip the aircraft. That is what if I have to get my aircraft to maintenance? What if my ADSB is not working? What if it's a one-off that I have to transition the airspace? Where we're going with that is there's a tool that is presently being created through the air traffic services with the flight standards input on it of how we're going to implement those aircraft that are non-equipped. Again, that's not a get out of jail free card that if you don't want to equip, there's certain policy and procedures on how that will go into effect. It is on the the Federal Registry at this point that you can go look at it and see how that affects you if you have the one-offs that you may potentially enter ruled airspace. For those that don't know what ADS-B is, we're transitioning the airspace from, as I stated, the radar environment that we're all used to today to a satellite-based system. What the thought process is, it's going to enhance safety, it's going to make us more efficient, and get rid of some of those areas that, like the Gulf of Mexico with the oil and gas guys who's been working ADS-B for a long time. Some of the areas in the outlying areas of Alaska. We now will be able to have some of that technology to utilize to track these aircraft more precisely and more efficiently to move the aircraft around. One thing that you will see coming up is your POI should be reaching out to you to find out what some of those barriers are for you to be able to equip by the 2020 deadline. They also should be trying to find out about your equipage, where you're at in that process, and to feed back some information that we have today. For example, as of the end of March, there were approximately 3,900 U.S. registered helicopters that are equipped. Of that 3,900, there was about 3,600 that have what we call a good install, which means we have approximately 300 that are having non-performing equipment. Non-performing equipment basically means you've got an aircraft that either is not functioning to the performance standard of the 91-227 rule, the performance side of it, or there was an install error, or it could be something as simple as a pilot error. That way we can work these things out through training, through maintenance, whatever, before the rule actually kicks off. So when your POI shows up at your door, he or she is not there to be a burden. They're actually there to try to help get you moving along before we're, what are we now, 7 months out before the rule goes into effect. The second thing I want to talk about is the Authorization Bill. Section 314 is some requirements that Congress has put on the FAA to get reports from the helicopter air ambulance. The 314 section that I'm referring to deals with the 5010 database. For you guys that don't know what the 5010 database is, that's the database that deals with all airports and heliports, that shows where they are, what their names are, and stuff like that. That database is used to feed many, many different databases across the aviation industry, whether it's the NOTAM database, whether it is the Before You Fly app for the UAS operators. We have been mandated to work with the helicopter air ambulance community to find out what is going on with the helipads, because what we are being told and what we're finding out through research is either the IDs for these places are messed up, they're not in the database at all, the lat longs are incorrect. One of the things that I think we can all agree on is helipads change locations. Hospitals, if they decide to build a new hospital wing, or they decide to build a new parking garage or something of that nature, that helipad to them sometimes is just a piece of concrete. It moves to the other side of the building. How does that affect you guys? It affects you guys in several different manners. One of the easiest ones that I'll throw out there that we're all familiar with because we see it on TV every day is the UAS world. Okay, UASs are multiplying in our airspace on a daily basis. The Before You Fly app takes the data out of that 5010 database, That way the UAS operators know where the helipads, airports, and stuff like that is. If that data is incorrect, they don't know where it is. If they don't know where it is, they could put a drone right over the top of your heliport as you're starting to lift, or as you come out of the clouds on an instrument procedure, that drone could be right there. The other way that it affects you guys is your special instrument procedures for the folks that work the IFR operations. That data is used to design the instrument surfaces for the instrument procedures. If that data is incorrect, your procedures could be incorrect to a degree, or slow up the process of you getting the procedures. With the 5010 database, there's a couple things going on out there right now. The United States Helicopter Safety Team Infrastructure Working Group has actually worked with industry, worked with the FAA at putting a paper together to give to the Office of Airports to try to update the 5010 form to make it more helicopter applicable. If you look at the current form today, it's really set up for airports versus heliports. So any input you guys have on that would be very much appreciated. The second thing is, there's many of you in the audience that already your organizations are looking in your area to find out if the 5010 database is correct for your area. We're not necessarily asking for you to be a tattletale on the hospital. We're not asking for you to be the police of the database. That's not what we're asking for. But if you know a heliport changes, it goes to the other side of the hospital. A hospital closes, or they put in a heliport that they've never had before. What we would like the management of this audience to do is reach out to them and make sure they understand that there is a FAA requirement under Part 157 to notify the FAA anytime they open a new heliport, they deactivate a heliport, they alter a heliport in any significant way. That leads me into my last thing. That 5010 database, as I said, affects your instrument flight rules, procedures. To date, there's approximately 1,500 helicopter air ambulance instrument flight procedures into hospitals and clinics, or in some cases, honestly, to rest areas along interstates and stuff like that. If this data is not correct out of the 5010, when we go to flight check these procedures, when we go to try to get them into the NOTAM database, they're just not going to be correct. So what we ask you to do, if these things change, let us know. Again, the rule that I'm referring to is Part 157, which deals with the notice of construction, alteration, activation, and deactivation of airports and heliports. So please reach out to your hospitals, please reach out to your operators and say, hey, if you see something, say something. And I will close by saying that we have to be a team on this when it comes to these moving of helipads and stuff like that. The folks up here at the table, we're not out in the field every day, but there's somebody in your organization that is in the field every day. They go to these heliports and they go to these hospitals and they go to these landing sites at the rest areas and stuff. You know if something changed, you know if something is altering your landing zones, please reach out to us. That way we can help and get this fixed to increase the safety and efficiency of your flights.
Okay. Next.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Is this, am I mic'd up? Okay, good. Thank you. So my name is Wayne Frye, and a couple things I wanted to talk about today, and I'm a division manager within Flight Standards. And if you're in this room, there's a pretty good chance that one of my 9 offices oversees your certificates. I cover most of the HAA operators through my 9 FSDOs, from Oakland to Allegheny, which is in Pittsburgh, from Boise down to Baton Rouge. So my point of view is really more towards the field and the interface we have with industry, but also I'm the co-chair for the United States Helicopter Safety Team. So my interest is pure safety, as everybody up here in this table is. Our interest is the safety piece and how we move things forward. And I want to build on something that Nolan said, if you don't mind, about the ADS-B, because the FAA has really taken, in the last probably 6 to 8 weeks, a very active role in reaching out to you and your peers and your competitors and everybody about ADS-B. I was at the North Texas FSDO yesterday morning before I flew up here, and they were putting labels on several hundred envelopes to send out to Part 91 operators and the GA folks to remind them of the requirement. Nolan, maybe you can help me. The last data I saw was we had about 75,000 aircraft equipped, I think, that we've validated in the system, or we see in the system.
That is approximately a true number if you're talking year 121, 135, and 129 operators.
Yeah, what we're seeing right now, so what we're seeing is that there's still a lot of aircraft out there that need it. This rule has been in place since almost 9.5 years now, so it's not a surprise, but we do see some lags out there in the industry of people getting the equipage. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I asked a couple of the repair station folks what they're spending on the equipage for ADS-B, and what I heard was a very common figure of $8,000 to $10,000. So if you've got a J3 Cub or if you've got a Cessna 150, you can probably double the value of your aircraft by doing these kind of installations. So we're seeing some challenges there, but what Nolan said is very true, is that we're trying to figure out what do we do with the folks that choose not to equip. But also, you will hear from, if you haven't heard from your POI, your PMI, or your PAI yet about your status, because we're asking those questions. We're not only reminding you, my offices should be reaching out and asking how you're doing. So has anybody heard from the FAA? I'm just curious. How many of you? Several hands going up. Good, because we really do want to make sure that come 2020, we're still out there operating. And this segment of the business is too important to us to not make sure that we're doing all we can to help you get there. So don't be surprised if you hear from us, if you get a letter, if you get an email, if you get a visit. As Nolan said, it's a friendly visit. We just want to make sure that we're doing all we can to help you get there, and we're trying to spread the awareness. When I look at this group, I'd be very surprised if there were any people in here who really weren't aware of the rule. Like I say, it's been out there a long time. But if you do see our folks showing up and asking about it, that's why. We've asked them to, because we want to make sure we're doing all we can to help you with that. So are there any questions or comments on ADS-B? Anything that we can, yeah. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah, Chris, do we, let's get a mic to you.
And Matt said it earlier, and this really ought to be interactive. And so what I'll try to do is, as I go through my subjects, and this isn't even mine, but I'm talking about it anyways because I have such a high level of interest in it, is I'd like to hear if you have any comments or questions. So if that works for everybody, does that not work for anybody? Anybody? Okay, go ahead.
You say 75,000 are already equipped with ADS-B?
I think that's about the number that we're seeing. Is that
And what is the total?
Well, we have a couple 100,000 aircraft registered in the U.S. Is that the question? Yeah. So
And does that include drones?
No, this is just the aircraft, not the drones.
Just the aircraft?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, we have a lot of aircraft. You have 121 operators that will have aircraft that won't be equipped. If you're FedEx or UPS, you might have aircraft that stay in South America or someplace. So we're seeing that in a lot of the operators, we're seeing a variety of responses to this. But again, I'm back to, if you hear from us, it's because we care. And we're trying to make sure that, especially in this industry, that's so critical to safety for the people out there and keeping our loved ones safe when they have accidents and incidents or they need transportation. We don't want this group to ever miss a flight because of ADS-B. So that's why we're asking. So please don't be surprised. So again, I think that's an important piece of what we're doing. Matt, I think a word I hear you use a lot and help me is integration. No matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about UAS or ADS-B, we're really talking about integration. And part of what I just wanted to comment on is what we're trying to figure out in the FAA is how we can help you continue to operate in a safe manner through integration of a lot of things. You're going to hear some stuff from our UAS folks. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing per the ReAuth Act. But our goal is for integration for everything, to be out using the NAS safely, to be out there working effectively, and to make sure that we're not impeding progress. There's so many challenges right now. There's that old curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, you're there, folks. We're all there. And this is the most dynamic time I've seen in the FAA since I've been my 22 years with the FAA. There's a lot going on, and we're doing a lot of good things. And I want to encourage you as advocacy groups to think about what Lirio was talking about, which is the ARCs and the ARACs. Matt, I'm thinking your organization's very involved in these. If you're not, become a part of that. Lirio, am I saying that right? These folks can be involved in those, and they can participate?
Certainly on the ARAC, it's a public meeting. If we have a tasking, we'll actually do a subgroup under a working group, put your nomination in. On ARCs, if you're interested, really it's contact the FAA and let us know that you're interested and provide a name. If it's your organization, we try to do that. On the ARCs, we have more flexibility to bring in industry and different sites, and we always want it to be balanced with the different segments of the aviation, so the pilot community, the operator community, the manufacturing community, we try to balance that. So that's an opportunity to provide your perspective into the rulemaking process. Yeah.
So, Lirio, if they wanted to be involved, how would they find out what's available and what's out there and what you need, where you need help?
Usually you'll see the ARC charter posted on the FAA website once we've established it. The charter is signed by the administrator, it provides the scope of the activity, and then we'll typically have a designated federal official, that's what we call them, but it's the liaison that will be leading that subject area. But you will often know if it's related to your area of interest that there's something going on, because we try to make that visible. Reach out to the person within the FAA and just say, how can I provide my name and interest, and then it'll come into us.
Sure, and I would say...
And certainly our
I'm
office
sorry.
too is a point of contact if there's any questions on that.
Of course, and those of you that know me, if you have an interest, give me a call. You know, I see a lot of you on a pretty regular basis in my office visits and coming out. I was in Denver the other day meeting with an operator, and I try to get out to see as many as I can. But if you have an interest, I know, Matt, you probably advertise this pretty heavily.
Oh,
Am
yeah,
I correct?
absolutely.
So not only are your organizations, and I think if you ask Kimberly or if you ask Sally Veith, they would tell you their activity level on these. But I think it's important that as an industry and as a regulator, we work really closely on these things. We're just better when we work together. And I keep telling that to the folks that I work with. I think that when we work as a team towards safety, I think we get a better product. And I think we're starting to see really positive results from that. And as in rulemaking, especially when you look at the 2-for-1 rule, you know, we're really trying to do the right thing. The rules that we're putting in today are powerful rules. They're the smart rules. And I think we're trying to get rid of some of the things that aren't working so well. So we always are looking for your input. But I would say to this, if you're in this room, then you have an interest. And you've shown your interest and you've expressed it by sending resources and more importantly, your time to be here. So thank you for doing that. But please, don't make it just the meetings. Please get engaged, get involved. United States Helicopter Safety Team, ARACs, ARCs. Call me. If you have something you want to talk about, I always encourage people to call me. I have, like I say, I have 9 offices. But there are 8 of us in the FAA that run all of general aviation. Everything outside the 121 world. We're in charge. There are 8 of us. And we work for a guy named Jim Viola, who's in charge of all of it. It's a small group. If you want to have your voice heard, call us. We really do want to know what you got to say. I don't have a slide with my phone number. I think many of you have my phone number, but if you want to see me, if you need to chat with me, please do so while I'm here both days. But I think there's a lot of things going on that are very important, and I think that your participation is incredibly important. When I got invited to this, I was asked to speak to a little bit on the ReAuth on 359, which has to do with UAS work, and I'm no expert on UAS, but it has to do with how we're using UASs in emergency management, whether it's firefighters, earthquakes, firefighters, whether they're fighting fires, earthquakes. We got flooding up in Iowa that I'm sure is going to roll down the Mississippi. All those things that we're doing today to try to integrate the FAA and UAS. And I think it's incredibly important because not only did the Reauthorization Act speak to us actively participating, which was reaching out to people, but also doing some studies. I think it's incumbent on this industry, and you guys are the one in the room, and Matt and Sally and folks, that we have an opportunity to do the right thing and get ahead of this thing. I know, Matt, you guys are very active in the UAS business. Yeah. And when it comes to emergencies, what could be better? I mean, it's a low-risk operation for people. We have the equipment. We're starting to see a lot of activities. And the FAA, through the Reauthorization Act, was mandated to do some things. I just wanted to touch base with that. And I'm not, like I say, I'm not an expert on it. We do have the experts here this week, but we've reached out as a group to talk to the folks that are on the front lines, which is the International Association of Fire Chiefs, International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Emergency Management Associations. We're reaching out to them, we're talking to them, we're attending their conferences, we're doing podcasts, we're doing a lot of work right now to make sure that not only are we aware of what the needs are, but that we're trying to stay active and ahead of it. UAS has happened so quickly and has multiplied so fast. It's just incredible part of our business. But what better venue would you have, or what better opportunity would you have to use UAS than a high-risk environment like a forest fire, where we can send in the equipment and get the idea of what's going on. So we had a mandate to not only do outreach, but also to do some studies, and I'm real pleased to, if you don't know about it, we're working with the Alliance, and I'm going to read this because I get it wrong every time I try to remember it. The Alliance of System Safety of UAS through Research Excellence, ASSURE. How many of you know about the ASSURE organization? Very many people? Just a few. Really an amazing organization. It's a lot of the leading schools, some of the premier schools in aviation, Embry-Riddle, University of North Dakota, Louisiana Tech, Auburn, War Eagle. Any War Eagles? War Eagle, all right. I sent all my money to Auburn, Alabama, so. It was the best investment I ever made. But so we're working not only with the schools that have an interest in this, but also the industry partners. And we're working to do a study right now on how do we integrate these aircraft into the NAS and keep them safe. As many of you know, we have shut down firefighting operations because of drones or UAS that got in the way. And we do shut them down now. When they happen, when an unauthorized drone shows up, we pull back the bombers, we pull back the firefighters. That's got to end. We've got to make sure that not only are we continuing to do the emergency management way in a meaningful manner, but also that people understand what the limitations are and that we can make it safe for everybody to be out there. We continue to use the drones. We're doing a study, and what we're looking at is what's the best way to integrate them into the NAS in emergency situations, but also how do we ensure the safety. So we want to make sure we understand what's being done today. What's the equipment look like? What are people using? Are we using just for spotters? Are we actually going out and doing firefighting? What are we doing with them? What does the future look like? Which is going to be the incredible piece. There's going to be some very cool stuff happening with drones, especially in the emergency management piece, where we can get out there and be more effective, be more targeted in what we're doing. So we're trying to doing a study to get a better understanding of what that looks like. And then what is industry's interest in it? What do you folks want to do in this business? It's too important not to do it. When I think about the HAA industry and then I think about the emergency management stuff, those are right on the forefront of real safety, where we're really helping people's lives and we're making people's lives better. So our goal is to have a better understanding. We're working with the smartest people we think in industry and in the education system to get a better idea and understand what the benefits might be and where the risks are. Again, it's all about safety. How do we make sure that our bombers that are out there, I was out in Denver the other day, and that is the office that did the big 747 that now is used in firefighting. It's just an incredible aircraft. Mm-hmm. But why would we shut that down because some person with a drone shows up? But we do. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. So we're trying to get a better handle on what the possibilities are, what we need to do to ensure the safety of the NAS, and then also how do we, if we're going to be certificating people to do this work, what does that look like? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen recently we've certified some 135 operations with UAS. I think the first one, was it Blacksburg? Am I saying that right? Was it down in Blacksburg, Virginia? Yeah, down there. We're getting ready. I have the Oakland office. We're working, as you can imagine, on the West Coast with a couple big operators that looking at probably doing another certification by the end of the summer. So there's a lot of activity in UAS. There's a lot of good stuff happening. We just want to make sure that through this Reauthorization Act, but also through our desire to drive safety, that we're doing it right. So I'm going to look over at Nolan. Any thoughts on anything I just said there? What did I miss? Because I'm sure I missed something.
The UAS side, from my workings, I think you hit most of it at the high level on the head. So are there questions or comments on that? I'm really kind of curious to know because this group, when I go visit the helicopter air ambulance operators, this is one of the #1 things we talk about is integrating the UAS into the system safely, because the airspace that you folks occupy most of the time is also the airspace that a lot of drones are in, a lot of UAS. So I'm really interested in, and again, I like this forum, but if you want to talk to me offline or do a sidebar, I'd be more than happy to talk to you. But I really am interested in what you're seeing, what you're doing. I will tell you, Manny's here. We both attend a meeting in the North Texas area, in the DFW area. It's an all-voluntary group that gets together, and it's HA operators, police, fire departments, the military. We get together every quarter and talk about what we're seeing in the local airspace.
And is it an issue with a heliport moving, or maybe a change, somebody's put up a crane over by Methodist Hospital? But the kind of grassroots activities that are taking place out there to keep us safe are the ones I think that we need to promote and look at. The FAA is doing what we can, industry is doing what we can. There's an opportunity for us to get together, like I said, and I think we're better together. Let's do it. Let's get out there and have local organizations where we're sharing data and information. The North Texas Air Safety Council, they share NOTAMs, they get together, and if there's a conflict, we work them out. But not only do we meet quarterly, it's also created that network where people talk. So if you're in Phoenix or if you're in New York, I know there are things done along the Hudson Valley and the Hudson River for these sort of things. We have opportunities to be safer and be better by talking and by integrating different kinds of operations into what we're doing. And we're kidding ourselves if we don't think the UAS world is going to explode again. It's going to get so much bigger. They're getting cheaper, they're getting faster, they're getting more range. We're starting to see 135 operations. A couple years ago, we certified an agricultural operation out in Oregon State, where they use swarms of these things to go out and do fields. So let's pay attention, let's make sure that we're ahead of it, and let's talk as a group. Again, we're the regulators, you're the operators. We both have the exact same interest. Let's take care of it and let's talk. And that's really my biggest point today is if there's an issue, if there's a challenge, let us know about it. You know, if there's something we can do together, let's do it. We're better, we're smarter, we're more capable. When we look at the regulation side, whether it's working with Lirio's group to change a regulation or to get more information out there, or if it's your industry trying to figure out how to better integrate and work with these folks. So, are there any questions for me? Yes, sir. Let's get you a microphone so that
Yeah, we got a
everybody
mic
can hear
right
you.
here.
'Cause in addition to having worked on helicopters for 30 years, I'm getting old and I can't hear anymore.
Okay, my question is everyone going to operate under a Part 107, or are there going to be carve-outs where there's exemptions for government or for other people? Or are we all going to play by the same rules?
I'm going to look at Lirio.
Well, so Part 107 is a framework for UAS that are under 55 pounds with certain specific limitations as it is. Right now, Part 107 is visual line of sight, under 55 pounds, under 400 feet. So that's the box that they operate in. So if you're operating in that, but you're still going to want to do, and are going to end up doing a 135 operation or a 137 operation, you still have to be certified. Your airworthiness of the aircraft is under the Part 107 at that point. Now, there is in this last reauthorization, it's section, I got to remember, there's it's a 345, 347, 349. There's a number of sections that we have that relate to UAS. One of them will repeal the section 333 of the previous reauthorization that allowed us to do certification of UAS under 55 pounds based on a safety and security assessment that there would be no hazard to the NAS. So we will be making an airworthiness replacement for that under Part 21, I think, in the next few years, so that'll go away. So essentially, 107 has started as the framework to allow them to operate, as John Duncan and I used to say, it was like this box. So they're pretty much, in this area, they're safe. Anything beyond that, then they will have to meet other requirements. And I think we've been trying to say that in integration, it doesn't mean they're segregated. The other thing that will change 107 and some of the operations as we initially had the framework was that the section 336 requirement that was related to model aircraft operations in the previous reauthorization as well has been repealed in this reauthorization of 2018, which is a benefit to us because before it was a segment of operators who were considered modelers, which were to have been the traditional definition of operating under a community-based organization. However, anyone that picked up a drone from a box, went out and flew it, they would say, well, I'm just doing it for hobby and recreation. So there was this definitional change where you thought you had 107, the real modelers, and these other hobbyists. That's not going to exist anymore. And we are in the process of getting the regulations to up to speed to reflect that. In fact, we just took in a new rule that will implement section of the new reauthorization to repeal the 336, and that's section 349 of the recent authorization. So we'll be taking away the Part 101 section E that, which was the rule that memorialized the statute of the previous reauthorization. I'm not sure that's getting there. So a lot of the carve-outs that you would see before are going away. My point is being that what we want to do is really, if we're integrating, that UAS will end up having a slightly different certification basis based on their risk. But if you're talking of a UAS that's a 747, which it could be, it will meet the same certification requirements appropriate to its risk, which would be a Part 25 aircraft. The operations will still be under 135, under 137, whatever it may be, if external loads, whatever they may be used for operations, they will still have to meet those requirements, and that's what we intend for the future.
Good. So there's one of the things that I would say about UAS is turn around and it'll change because it's such a dynamic industry. And I know we're working hard to keep up with it, and I think in rulemaking, that's always a challenge for us just because rulemaking takes time because it's a process. It's a very important process, and when we do it well, it turns out good rules, and you folks have your voices in those. But when it comes to the rulemaking process, it is a little longer. When we have things that are mandated by Congress, either through a public law or through a reauthorization, it kind of changes our schedule a little bit. Am I saying that right, Larry?
Yeah, we try to meet the timelines as often as possible with Congress, but really it's more important to meet the intent. And I think there's a recognition on that. And in this reauthorization, I don't want to talk only on reauthorization, but in this reauthorization, it's a 5-year reauthorization. However, over 75% of the timeframes were put together were dated within the first 6 months to 2 years. So as they were adjusting all the requirements, typically reauthorizations for the FAA is a 2-year, with giving us 5 years, which is great. They just didn't schedule out the timing. So we try to meet the timing, but what I think was really important is the safety implications. We try to look at what is the most impactful and how it fits into our current program, try to roll in those requirements that provide the benefits that we need and are actually the safety functions that are the most important.
And I'm going to give you just a second, I'll get to you. So I think it's incredibly important what Larry just said was the intent and what they're asking us to do. So we get our direction from Congress, and they kind of give us an idea of the direction they want us to go. And they do give us very specific deadlines. But I think it's important to understand that comes from Congress. And if you haven't read the Reauthorization Act, you can download it. It's 400 pages or so. I think it's fascinating reading. I tell you, you'll be excited to read it. But I think it's also one of those things that, as an organization, I'm sure you probably have HAI and all those folks to kind of really kind of get a sense of what that looks like and target where it's at. But it is interesting to see the direction that they tend to send us because it's important to us, and we want to make sure that we're doing what our legislators tell us to do, but also want to make sure that we have you folks engaged in as we're working those things out. Yes, sir.
You got a mic somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So, this is a real hot topic for me. I'm very passionate about the UAS. I think that there's definitely some great use cases for partnering with manned aircraft to make them more effective. For example, you talk about fire safety. You can send in an unmanned drone to target the area with a thermal camera to figure out where to drop the fire retardant and to actually attack the fire in the best, most efficient way to make the manned aircraft more efficient. So the biggest difference, I think, and that we really need to be mindful as we proceed down this path with remote ID and remediation and operating in the national airspace is to make sure, because this is unique, right? You've got a ground-based component and a NAS-based component. So we need to be able to communicate with the pilot in some way, shape, or fashion. Just simply having a broadcast signal, we're moving away from that in manned aircraft with the ADS-B, but we have to be able to communicate with a pilot in some way, shape, or form. That's the key component I think we're missing in some of the committees and some of the proposed solutions. So just, we can talk more later, but I think that that's a critical component that we're really missing right now.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's the first time I've heard somebody express it that eloquently because, we're moving beyond line of sight. We're doing a lot of things, and you were asking about carve-outs and some of the changes we're seeing where we're starting to authorize new and different things. And, initially, this is truly baby steps. I think that it's important that we keep up with industry, but also I think we're trying to figure out what does that look like. And, some of the technology we're using in UAS, I've heard it. I was in a great discussion the other day with the guys talking about moving that over into the manned side. There's things we're doing. What the great comment I heard from one of the guys in the DFW area was that they have these stabilization systems in these drones that it's a chip the size of my thumbnail, and I look at an autopilot inside a helicopter, and I think that I'm carrying less fuel because of the size of the autopilot. So, you know, how can we move that technology back and forth? But also, I think that there's a piece there that, and I'm going to take that as a note because it was the first time I've heard that, is what are we doing to make sure that we keep the operator in the loop, the pilot, and how do we have that kind of communication set up? Because I think that's a, quite frankly, a piece that I hadn't really thought about, so maybe that'd be helpful to me. I'm going to look at the other panel members. Tom, and Nolan, any comments? I think that's, okay, thank you for that. Yes.
My question's about subpart L. You've got in 615 the 300 foot for us in the day, and then you've got drones up to 400 feet. What are we going to do to deconflict with that 100-foot altitude outside of just, you know, landing and the conflicts there? But you've got that overlap now.
I'm going to look to my peers here because I don't know that answer. We may have to take an IOU on that one. Tom, did you get anything on that?
I'll just say, testing, I'll just say that that was one of our concerns for the, you know, deconflicting of traffic, and we're addressing it, but we don't have anything viable just yet to establish policy-wise.
There are overlapping requirements, I understand, and that's what we tried to do, and we look at the risk is, in UAS operations, if they're operating right now under 107 as they should be within, not within the 5-mile radius of an airport. So that's why the before you fly zone would be there. Now, helicopters can land wherever they need to, that's true, especially when you're doing your operations. I think that's one of the differences where we look at through operationally trying to provide notification of that. I think the comments of being able to talk to the pilot and all of that will be better integrated in the future. Right now, there's the safety mechanism that it should be beyond visual, you know, should be within visual line of sight, not within the 400 feet, as again we said, under a specific weight limit to limit, and not over people. So if there's some sort of event that's occurring where your operation, a helicopter, emergency medical situation where helicopters can land where it's not designated as an airport issue, there should not be any operations of drones because it's going to be over people in that sense. So there's, in theory, there's these mechanisms to try to deconflict. I know in reality it's not always there, but that's where the improvements as we go through the regulatory program to continue to layer additional safeguards as the operations become more complex. We hope to be able to consider those all more coherently.
And Danielle, keep in mind a couple things. First off, that's a minimum. That's the lowest.
Yeah.
The second thing is that's a rule, you know, regulation. And for 135-611, if those of you have been following that for the last 4 years, slow process, and it's not a high priority. One of the things that we've run into problems, you know, issues with, is when we were writing the guidance for HAA operations and for OCCs, you know, we sat down in a room, we brought people in from the other people from the FAA. Y'all got to look at it, and. We said, for example, you know, we talked about risk analysis. You know, regulatory requirements for risk analysis are, but if you want to have a really good one, you should, blah, blah, blah. Well, we've of late run into a little audit issue. We audit ourselves in the FAA, and the word should has a specific meaning to us. It's an expectation. It's right in Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section 1 of our FAA order. And it just, you know, so we're doing these audits and they're coming back and they're saying, hey, you know, it says the operator should have this, and they don't. We went and looked. And so now it's kind of being a paperwork drill, and we're trying to be a little bit more careful on how we use that word should, because it would be very easy for us to write an advisory circular or a SAFO or an info saying, hey, you should. But that's as far as we can go without, you know, involving the inspectors. And one of the interesting things, a lot of people aren't really aware of how things in the FAA work. It's kind of cool. You know, Wayne, he's in safety assurance. I'm in safety standards. And how that all works is, you know, we have these regulations. Now, I'll just point at you because I know you don't really make them. You just have that little tiny spreadsheet over there that I couldn't read if my life depended on it, of all those activities. But so, somebody has to write a policy for the inspectors, a method, not necessarily a checklist, but a method of things that, a tool they can use to go out to an operator and see if they're operating in compliance with the regulations. And we go to rules like checking rules, you know, may consist of all the maneuvers, but yet in our guidance we say it will consist of all these maneuvers. The operator says, well, wait a minute, the rule says it may, and we're saying, yeah. And the way those regulations are written, there's latitude for the FAA to come in and define through policy what we expect. And then we write advisory circulars for our industry, saying, hey, these are some of the ways, not necessarily all of the ways, but here are some of the ways you can comply with these rules. And so when we're talking especially, and I really do not want to talk about UAS, it makes my head hurt. But because there's so many facets to that arena, and we could go on for hours anyway. So we're working on questions like that, but the right approach, and that's why, I mean, there's a lot of you in this room that have gotten phone calls or emails from me saying, hey, what do you think about this? You know, here's what I'm getting ready to write. What do you think? And I'll send it to some of you because I know that I was talking to the young lady from ASU. I had questions about goggle policy that needed to be updated. And so who do you call? You know, I mean, I've been flying goggles for several decades, but, you know, they actually work with them every day, and I can get the ins and outs of how this works and what we need to say. And that's why, again, not to overemphasize the importance of participation, but the first thing I believe that this group needs to do is get all the people that aren't in this room, because we're obviously the active participants, and some of you are here for the first time. It's really impressive to see the Broward County honcho here. It's nice because we can count on you for help, and it is a two-way street with the stakeholders out there. So we do the best we can. There's a long answer to your question about what we're going to do, but I'm going to take the opportunity to say that. On the public notice comments, and we publish things regularly from advisory circulars, MMELs, sometimes policy guidance, and you can, public documents open for comment, hit the little envelope, and I know, I get about 20 emails a day saying, hey, this is open for comment, and somehow I got FDA stuff in there. Kind of interesting, but not as interesting as the hundreds of pages of the Reauthorization Act, but it's important that we get the participation level up. You know, those of us in the room, we can work and work hard, but our first job needs to be get everybody that's not in this room in this room. There right now are 64, soon to be 63 actually, HAA operators in this country. And I believe that every single one of them needs to be sitting in this room to discuss the issues, because it's the ones that get left out in the dark or that don't participate, that don't hear, or don't, you know, the good ideas that come out of this group. So, while I have the floor.
Why don't you keep the floor?
Yes.
Hey, Tom, if I
Since-
may, I'd like to
I
readdress
just lost
part
it.
of
Isn't
that.
that amazing?
Yeah, you're out. Anyway, I would like to readdress that. Part of that issue is what I was talking about earlier with the 5010 process. Part of that deconfliction is we have to know where your heliports are. If we don't know where your heliports are, we cannot deconflict them with the Before You Fly app and the UAS and stuff like that. Tying into that, I think 2 weeks ago I was at the charting forum, and one of the discussions that came up, and I would really like you guys to find me offline after this, is on the helicopter charts around your major metropolitan cities right now. There is the trauma centers are on there. As UASs start to move into these larger areas, checking the high rises and checking stuff like that, we need to make sure that those locations are identified. What we need to know from you guys, is it important to know that if it's just a hospital, or is it important to know that it's an actual trauma center? That way you know where to take the patients. We understand that you guys that work the area understand that all the time. But if you have another 9/11 situation, you have an Oklahoma City situation where aircraft from the police department, National Guard, the Army, medevacs are coming in, do they know where the trauma centers are? Are we taking the patients to the right place? So think about it, find me over the next 2 days. Tell me if it's important enough to know to keep it charted as just a hospital, or is it important enough to keep it on there as a trauma center? But again, we have to have this data to know where these locations are, and the data has to be correct.
Oh, okay.
And then,
Mark?
I think you're in, Tom.
No, it's okay. We got one from 7 Mark coming back there. Sean.
Hi.
okay.
I'm hearing a lot about the UASs, and I appreciate the insights, and we're covering the issue from safety assurance standpoint, a safety promotion standpoint. I'm interested in it from a risk assessment standpoint, some evidence-based understanding of outcomes. Is there any effort on the part of the agency from a research standpoint to understand what happens when a 30-pound pile of plastic and metal meets a plexiglass canopy at cruise speeds? What happens at a scene at the side of a highway when a hobbyist or somebody hoping to sell a picture to USA Today has a drone go through a rotor system or through a tail rotor? We've seen some of that kind of research on the fixed wing side recently, and I'm curious, can we anticipate some of that kind of evidence-based research and in an effort to promote safety among the hobbyist community and others to help understand the consequences of not being part of the team as it relates to operator safety?
I just point out one thing, just to remind, after lunch, we're having a UAS panel of leading UAS experts, and all of this stuff is going to be discussed. So I just want to try to make sure we don't miss the core, topics here, and get questions to these people outside of the UAS, subject matter, because that is going to be covered completely in a separate panel. But Tom, did you have additional comments?
Well, I was just hoping it would kind of go on long enough where I didn't have to go over any of this other stuff, because they might inspire questions too. But yeah, just a few more quick ones. From the HA point of view, some of you may be curious. Lirio mentioned a rulemaking to do with HAA, and that was the 135-611. That got slowed a little bit due to the furlough, but that does have a time frame, end of July for actual publication. So I know there's a flock of exemptions out there. If they expire anywhere near close to July, you may want to, just in case, apply for the extension to your exemption. Most of the MMELs, 206, 407s, and all that for the radar altimeter MMEL relief or MEL relief haven't been done. There's still some models out there that haven't been. There were some legacy models like the BK-117s and the S-76 that had real old MMELs. So they were granted coverage, but there was a few models, the EC-135, I think, is either in draft or done to allow relief for radar altimeters inoperative. Had a lot of provisions in there, so if you haven't seen that. And they were a result of just a lot of negotiation just to get the MELs approved. AO21 is being amended. I sent a blast email out to every DO. I think I had everybody's address right. I had to get a few new ones. AO21 is being amended primarily because the reporting requirements have changed. So everybody should have gotten that, and we're developing a new template to submit that data. It's a lot easier. You don't have to do it by aircraft anymore, or by time of day, just or just actually at how many hours at night. And yeah, I am the poor slob that has to take those couple 100,000 data points and put them in some kind of sense and submit that report to Congress. We do have one petition for an exemption in process. All I'm going to say about it is that it has to do with HTOS and FDMS relief. It's in process, and hopefully within the next few weeks that will be answered. And if it gets granted or denied or partially granted, whichever way it goes, I will again through industry and through pass that out to you. I could wait and talk about this later, but I'm going to do it now because Matt talked about culture in the industry, and it's going to be talked about later on. I said a minute ago that it's, the people that aren't in this room are the ones we need to get here, and I think the talk about safety culture, I hope everybody sits in on that one because, as people read regulations and policy, like the 300-footer, Danielle, that's a minimum. It doesn't have to be. personally, if I knew I was in an area with people flying drones, I'd probably be way above that. And if I couldn't get up because of weather, I'd probably not be there. 802 during the day, those are the minimums. If you're at a new base, I got sent to a new base or a workover base at night, and man, my minimums weren't the night minimums back then. I mean, until the stars came out, I didn't go fly because it was in the mountains of Kentucky. So those are things that I look forward to you addressing as far as safety culture goes.
Yep.
Are there any questions specific to HAA policy that anybody would like to address to me? Yeah.
Jonathan Godfrey from LZ Control. I do have, it kind of covers quite a few subjects all at once, and then I'll have a follow-up one after it. But while the FAA Reauthorization Act points to hospital heliports in the 5010, is this issue isolated to just them, or is it a systemic issue across all helicopter infrastructure? And really, this was kind of a take it from Ames and then include it with all of HAI. And then part of that also is who in the FAA owns the 5010 system and who will be responsible for any changes to it. Is it standards, airports, or somebody else?
I believe it to be answer B in both cases. And that is, there's heliports, they're not just HAA and hospital heliports. And all of them, whether it's oil and gas, they're not just on the oil rigs, they're onshore too. Then we have private people putting in private heliports that no one knows about. Of course, we've got some industry folks like you that are actively engaged in finding and doing research and providing that. The USHST is heavily engaged in that. I'm pretty sure I'm safe in saying it's not just HAA, but it's industries wide. And the second part of that is we're debating that right now. Just because it falls into the airport database, operations policy divisions do not manage the airport's database. But then again, who better to work with industry and proponents to try to get that information into the airport's database? So I don't think it's going to be a finger point, you do it, you do it. It's going to have to be a three-sided approach to get this problem resolved. Operations is going to have to work and safety assurance, working with industry to find a way to see if all these heliports we land at are in the database, and then if they're not, to get that information to airports and the forms filled out so it is in the database. And that we all acknowledge, that's a pretty important thing that needs to be done. So we're not really pointing a lot of fingers about who owns it. We're pointing a lot of fingers about right now about trying to get on paper who's going to do what. And I think there's meetings this week or next week that have more to do about that. What's your follow-on?
Yeah, the follow is with the new VTOL industry on the horizon, can we expect a change in oversight for infrastructure by the FAA given the significant uptick in volume as expected at these sites to rival regional Part 121 operations?
Now, that's one question in 27 parts. So, it's so broad ranging. For example, and it has to do with, there's regulations involved, and there's a lot of Part 110, 119 things, and then we've done spreadsheets evaluating all of Part 135 anyway. And one of the things brought up was the term powered lift. What is powered lift? Is that its own category? Well, maybe, but what do we got in the classes then? Because we picture powered lift. Everybody picture a powered lift aircraft in their head. Some people were picturing, an Osprey, a tilt rotor device. Well, what about a Harrier? It doesn't have rotors. And what about multicopters? And so the broad-ranging effects of this new technology or advancements in aviation, even the op specs, where are we going to authorize those instrument approaches? Nolan and I are working on that. We thought, well, gee, we can take Part H, terminal instrument approach procedures for helicopters, and call it helicopter instrument or instrument approach procedures for helicopters and aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing capability. But wait a minute, is this powered lift aircraft going to shoot its approaches like an airplane or a helicopter or both? And how do we authorize that? So right now, we are trying to encompass all these things, and it's going to affect not only operations, but oversight, you know, and who do we have in the FAA right now to, for example, give check rides? Shake your head so fast, shake it real slow, and no. Yeah, so we're really, this is front and center for us. And along with the front and center activities of all these things, we've still got all the little stuff going on. You know, for example, in my small branch of 8 people for all of 135 ops policy, half got pulled off to UAS-only activities. So we're trying to kind of ramp up, and you know, the office of AUS. That's Wayne, help me out. That's the UAS.
Integration
Yeah,
Office.
AUS is what they call it, the integration folks. They were formed to kind of help with all this stuff. That helps relieve some. So we're really working on it, and believe me, when that stuff comes out for policy comment, you guys need to comment on it. But we're not at a good start point. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's great. I think one thing, you mentioned 110 and 119, because I think it's a definition to start off with, and I think to address that, we actually have a current rulemaking to even allow those to come into the picture and be used for other operations and commercial service. So I think it's a starting point in the overall program. The questions you pose, they're still being asked, but what we have in the mechanism is the exemption process. In areas where we can make exemptions, one of the things we can't do exemptions to is definitions, so that's the starting point. So.
All righty. I'm just steer in a slight different direction about an operational issue. HAI is going to be revisiting the policy of the night vision goggles and coming off the goggles at 300 feet. And we think it's a discussion that should happen. And there's a lot of safety issues and concerns, there's a lot of thoughts and opinions. But to come off the goggles at a critical time in the approach profile, and what's the safety advantages, disadvantages of a potential goggle failure during those last couple of feet on the approach versus the real world of how many goggle failures you really having out there with today's technology and reliability, and are you cutting short the safety enhancements they provide by your worry about a failure in the unit? And are you having any conversations about that in any of the
I'll
divisions?
have one with you right now about that.
Okay, go get them.
Because, you know, for us, it's 4 full-face guys, and then, you know, 6 is, and then we've got better on. But, you know, that is not now, nor has it ever been an FAA policy or requirement. Mm-hmm. That's just how, when the things were going through the AEGs and everybody was involved in those supplemental type certificates.
Yeah.
Those requirements were written into those supplemental type certificates.
Right.
And remember when that happened,
Yeah.
I'm a young guy now, but I was a real young guy then, and I said, you mean to tell me if I'm driving down a mountain road in the middle of the night, a windy mountain road, cliff on one side, bear-infested woods on the other side, and one of my headlights burns out, I have to now turn off the other one? That's how I likened it. So, you know, they don't have goggles, and I have to take mine off.
Yeah.
But it's not us. And I'm not sure if the STC holders want to, if they want to, you know, it's going to cost them money to go through that recertification process to get that STC changed.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Well, you're going to be involved in that change,
Oh,
obviously.
yeah. And but it's kind of like my boss asked me, you know, it was when I bring up an issue, he says, is anybody complaining about that? I said, no, I just happen to see it. And then we move on to the ones that are real critical and people are complaining about. But I would certainly like to see that come across our desk if somebody were to apply for an STC without that restriction that not all have.
Yeah. Well, we have nothing to do, so we're going to raise the question.
I don't either. But I would like to, I would enjoy seeing something like that. And you know my thoughts.
Yeah, good. But with that, I'd like to flip that back to the audience. What's your thought on that issue with the 300 feet? What's your experience been? What's your desire? But we would, from our standpoint, we'd like to start a conversation about it and reopen it. Yeah, go ahead, up here. We'll get you a mic. Which? Yeah. Oh, we're yielding time. Oh, I feel like I'm in Congress.
Introduce yourselves when you.
Well, I can, my name's Keith Trepanian with the Mayo Clinic, and I actually have a question on helipads, but for the NVG at 300 feet.
Yeah.
A few of us here were in the Coast Guard for many years, and 300 feet was our lower level until a few of us Army guys came over and kept going, why are we not wearing goggles under 300 feet? And it took us a while, but I mean, that was in the early 2000s to go, this is stupid. I mean, why is this any different?
Yeah. So I would, well, Chris, you would know about that. Chris came to HAI from the position of chief pilot for the U.S. Coast Guard.
I've known him.
Yeah, there you go. Well, now we got a reunion going.
That's right.
All right.
So, but I do have a helipad question. The process, you want us to report and get helipads registered, which I agree with, but the process is seemingly broken. I go into an electronic form, I fill out and say, this is my helipad that I want to that we have, and upwards of 2 years, I might get information back. I don't have a point of contact to go, where is the status? It just may or may not magically appear, and I'm still, I have 3 that I've been waiting, one that finally came out over 2 years that said, oh yeah, here's your helipad, it's now certified. The other ones are just sitting there in progress. I have no idea, other than looking on my website to tell me what the status is. I don't know if they've looked any further or anything on that. And that's a challenge. I mean, if you want us to do it, we have to get some feedback and actually get it done. And then the second part is the advisory circular. I don't know where the status is on changing that. Minnesota took an advisory circular and made it law. So in order for me to get an airport or my helipad registered, I have to follow your advisory circular to the T. And if I don't have the 8-to-1 ratio to come out there, I can't get a helipad certified, even if it's clearly, every helicopter pilot in the state would easily go in there. I can't get it certified. So any feedback on that would be great.
There's just because we're doing it every day with heliports, I think I'm safe in saying that the databases that show the heliports, including the FAA's database that show heliports, are not accurate in any way, shape, or form. As to the status of the facility, whether it's still active or not, the current conditions, whether it's manned, unmanned, when its operating hours are, they're just not kept current. And anybody who's out there flying knows that because you're using some of these facilities, and they don't match the listing in any database they might be in. The other thing is people actually establish heliports and don't tell anybody. They don't file, and they don't even know about 157. It's like, this is my private property, and I'm going to land my helicopter here, and I talked to the town, and they said it was okay, we're ready to go. But the standard process is it's almost transparent. It's you file with the FAA, and the FAA's obligation with a heliport application is to determine any airspace conflicts. And then you file with the state. And the state has got its Department of Aviation, and they do exactly what you said. Many of the states have taken the advisory circular and made it an actual law in the state. You have to comply with the advisory circular, even though it's an advisory circular. And then the big battle always comes with the local level, the zoning board, in the community you're in, be it a city, town, village, county. And those 3 levels, really, if you go through the process, they work fairly well. It's pretty rare you get hung up by the state or the federal, mandates. You always get wound around the axle with the local town, municipality, and the zoning codes. And but we need to do a much better job, because I don't really have a high level of confidence when I'm looking up a heliport as to whether that listing is accurate and whether the thing's really operating. I mean, my backyard is New York City in the Northeast Corridor. I, just off the top of my head, can go in there and probably identify 15 heliports don't even exist anymore, and they're still in the guide. They'll say there's a heliport there and give you the information. Not anymore, there's not. And so that it is a problem. It's a major problem. And I don't claim to have the quick solution to it, but there is an obligation if you're in the helicopter operating business and you're operating a helicopter, this is your obligation to know what it takes to go get a heliport and how you're supposed to file. And there's certain criteria, if you're gonna use a facility X times, you know, within a given period, you're supposed to file that as an official, you know, heliport activity. But I mean, that's been my experience out there.
I can tell you that there is an active process. There's a gentleman sitting in the back of the room now, Mike Webb, that he and I are working with airports on a probably twice a month right now to try to figure out how to fix this system. We're also working with the USHST. We're working with HAI's Heliport Committee. There has been recommendations officially sent to the Office of Airports on how to kind of, as Tom was saying, how to put flight standards into that piece of pie with airports. Not to say it's theirs, ours, or it's got to be ours, meaning the flight standards, or ours, meaning airports. It's got to be ours, being the FAA, and pull that together as a team. Those things have already been sent there. I think our next meeting is about a week and a half from now. It's not going to be fixed overnight, but we're trying to figure out the best way to fix that. Please don't give up on sending the data in.
It's critical.
The initial contacts, reach out to your POI, mention this meeting, mention my name, I don't care, mention Mike Webb's name, he doesn't care. We will work with the POI, we will work with the Office of Airports, we will work with the USHST and HAI to try to facilitate moving this forward as fast as possible.
Yeah.
We do understand that there are some issues, but as Matt was just saying, some of it is just education.
Yeah.
Some of it is operators, owners, meaning you just won the lottery and you bought your helicopter and you want to land it in your backyard. A lot of people don't know that there's a 157 requirement to notify the FAA. They don't know the process to get it started. I can talk to you offline about the whole process, and you can tell me where it's wrong. Maybe I can take that information and share it with others, and maybe that is where it's wrong. But there is a process. It's in paper on Part 157 in the 7402L series for the inspectors. The FSIMs for the inspectors on how to do it. But we agree that there is a breakdown in some areas, and we are actively trying to fix those breakdowns. And I apologize for it taking 2 years at times to get some of your stuff done. Please don't give up on it, though.
And for whatever it's worth, our membership listing is on our webpage, and the reason I mention that, it's broken down by category of service that our members provide. And there's quite a few people who are heliport consultants. They're experts at it, and they do this for a living. If you need help, you can look through there and pick whoever you want, and they'll be able to lead you down the path and help you get your heliport.
One of the recommendations that has been made is to put on there if it's a first responder type facility, whether it be helicopter or ambulance, whether it be fire, whether it be police and stuff like that. We're hoping that and a digital database will enhance the process.
Yeah. Any other questions on any of the subject matter here? Yes, sir.
Hi, Matt. Wade Cook with PHR Medical, and this is in response to Tom asking about other HAI questions. But before I make that, I'd like to make a comment about the NVG and the removal of that 300-foot barrier. I would like to see us pursue that as an industry. And,
that is our intent.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if the process is going to be expensive for the SEC holder to reapply for that, we need to streamline that process because you're not changing anything with the STC. You're just removing an imposed limitation, which you find in the operator's handbook or in the SEC paperwork. So that shouldn't be burdensome or expensive. But my question was about the master MEL relief for all the ADSB requirements. You know, we're still fighting radar altimeter MEL relief that for a rule that started a couple, 3 years ago. Where are we with the master MEL and the ADSB? Because we're talking about some provisions to allow for aircraft not equipped to operate in rural airspace, but what about aircraft that are equipped that now have to fall under an MEL to be able to operate in rural airspace?
You know, it's amazing because, as you pointed out, still working on the MMEL relief for a rule that went into effect a couple of years ago. So to answer your question very candidly, I don't know. But I will find out and I will tell you.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And then the other one, you had mentioned the status of 135.611, the rewrite of that. Has there been any talk about 135.613, which that's your IFR to VFR and VFR to IFR transitions?
Yeah.
Which,
Which respect?
well, just the perspective of it allows a IFR to VFR transition at lower weather minima to get from your final approach point to a final destination. The follow-on to that says you can depart under that same minima if you follow an FAA approved obstacle departure procedure, and that piece of the puzzle effectively eliminates the benefit.
Go ahead.
That allows the benefit. I mean, if I'm going to a place that's not served by an instrument approach and I'm using the 613 privilege to get in at 602, I can't turn around and come out at 602 because I'm going to a place that's not served by a procedure, which means there's no approved obstacle departure procedure.
Well, you're right, and that's why we actually are changing the words in there, and I'm not so sure that's right where it is, but at least in policy, I thought that was, pretty sure that's 613?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's in 611. 611 authorizes you to use the minimums in 613 if you're following an obstacle departure procedure.
Okay.
So part of the 611 amendment was to take those words out of there and replace them with a published instrument departure procedure, which there are standard instrument departure procedures, obstacle departure procedures, ODPs, and diverse departure procedures, which is basically the reverse of the route you took out in context. Actually, a diverse departure, Mike, please don't say anything because I'm going to probably get this wrong. Basically, if you can take off, if they've done the obstacle analysis, any direction, make no turns from the runway or departure heading within so many feet, I think it's 300, 500, 400 feet, then you're good. So we took those words out of 611B, along with the words area forecast. So that is gone. So now, we have depart visually and depart VFR, right? Your VFR, the 602 and 802, those minimums apply. If you're not departing there, you're obviously departing visually, then you're departing with the minimums on the chart. But the obstacle departure procedure words are being taken out of that rule.
But is that not implying that destination is served by a procedure?
No, not if it, if you go into Lebanon, Tennessee, there's no departure procedure, but you do a diverse departure when you leave, published in the AIM. So that's considered a published departure.
Okay, fair enough. And then what about the part of 611 that deals with severe weather detection equipment? Was that also getting rewritten as well?
Yeah, that's the part we dealt with, and the reason is, and I'm sure that the writers, the crafters of that rule, they really did a good job for 90% of the way. But in the other rules that apply to other aircraft, airplanes, for example, they both say, you must either have severe weather detection or an operating weather radar on board, or installed, not operating, the equipment installed, and it must be operable when that type of weather is forecast to exist along the route at the destination or the alternate. And that's how that rule is being amended. So, yeah.
Can I make a reference?
Yeah.
Just to help you, I think if you... We can send you a link, but if you can get to the docket and you can actually look at it, it's 2120 AK94. If you look at that reference, and Twee's actually in the back, she could probably help you out with that as a link. Look at what was proposed, and we got some comments that we actually took into consideration. That's where we're working on the final rule, and I think it has addressed most of the concerns you have.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you for paying attention to
All righty.
the issues.
Well, we hit our
Matt,
time.
could I just say one more thing? Yeah, I still want to talk about the MVGs for a second and the STC holders. I know ASU is here. I'm not sure if anybody else is here. The requirement for the second crew member is another one we might want to either evaluate and do a risk analysis on if that's necessary.
Yeah.
So the pilot can get out of those LZs by themselves if they need to.
Okay. The next schedule is a networking break, which is going to be right out here with some refreshments. We would like you back in the room at 10:45, so you'll have the opportunity to continue, some of the questions, but yes.
My name's Karen Mahaney, and my husband was killed in a helicopter crash in July 3rd, 2015. And as a direct result from that and from the NTSB investigation, the rotor wing occupancy working group was formed, and that was in November of 2015, and they just completed their recommendations September of 2018. And I just 3 days ago spoke to the subcommittee chair, Dr. Dennis Shanahan, and he said he has yet to hear from anyone from the FAA on those recommendations. And so my question is, on his behalf, he's just wondering when will the FAA be contacting him and discussing the recommendations of that working group?
So this is an Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee. It's all public. The report was submitted officially to the FAA in the September ARAC meeting. The FAA acknowledged receipt of it because it goes to ARAC, then ARAC formally submits it to the FAA, so it was thereafter. I will admit with the timing of the year as it began, there has been some delay. It's also with the reauthorization that came out related to the crash-resistant fuel systems for rotorcraft, and the interpretation actually says all covered aircraft, and it's a self-enacting regulation required by the authorization related to that, which was a part of the report, because there was two parts. It was actually the structural capability as well as the fuel systems. So it is within the FAA right now. We have our next meeting in June. It'll be an update on that at that point. It is, along with reauthorization, moving into our program as appropriate. That's what I'll be saying. So
He just said he hadn't even received receipt.
we would have received it from ARAC chair, because when they made the recommendation as a subcommittee to ARAC, ARAC is a public forum, industry forum. I'm the designated federal officer, but it actually is represented by members of ARAC that become the chair and the co-chair, and the chair and the vice chair, I'm sorry. The chair did send a letter saying that they've received it, and they forwarded it to us. Once we have it in the office, we forward it to the appropriate program office, which is the Aircraft Certification Service at this point. So, okay.
Thank you.